Full Bloom is brought to you in part by the following. Welcome to Full Bloom, the award-winning show that celebrates life. Here's your host, Zita Christian.
Hi everyone, welcome to Full Bloom. I'm Zita Christian. You know, if I'm being truthful, I have to tell you that there are some times when I forget my keys. There are some times when I forget the name of someone I'm speaking with. There are some times when I'll walk up the stairs and forget what I went up there to get. So in today's world, I might think about those things and wonder, is it Alzheimer's? Is it something else? Should I be worried? Is there something I can do about it? And I want to let you know that we're going to talk about all of that tonight. In fact, we're going to talk about it for 4 nights, because tonight we're starting the first of a 4-part series on caregiving and dementia. And my guest, and I am so very, very proud to have her with me tonight, is Pam Atwood. Pam, thanks so much for being here. Your position at the Hebrew Health Care Center is the Director of Dementia Services. Is that correct?
That's correct, Zita.
That's a biggie. And the whole idea of dementia and of caregiving is so big that after spending a few hours talking with you pre-show, we decided that there's no way we're going to be able to cover this in one night. We're going to do a 4-part series. So we'll just jump in and we might repeat a few things as we go because they're important enough to repeat. Mm-hmm. But let's talk about tonight, because I always believe in starting with the worst and then working backwards, and then you're kind of prepared. Okay. So dementia is one word, but Alzheimer's is the word that strikes fear into the hearts of people. And I think from everything that I've heard as a layperson, I would say rightly so. So I want to talk tonight, if we could focus this first show about caregiving in general and the caregiver. So with that in mind, let me go over what I think would be an ideal 4 parts.
Okay.
We talk about caregiving in general and the caregiver tonight. Next time we talk about caregiving and the patient and that whole idea of memory loss, pain management, dementia, driving, you know, when you have to tell your parents.
Some of the hot issues.
Yeah, exactly, those hot issues. Siblings as caregivers and caregiving styles. Part 3, we're going to talk about behaviors. This is a really, really important show. Well, they all are, but particularly intimacy and aging, sexuality and aging, veterans with dementia, and then laughter therapy, what it is and why it works, and finally, Alzheimer's and the arts, making progress in answering your questions, because Pam Atwood has agreed to accept emails. And by the time we get to the 4th show in the series, you're going to have emails that we can answer that night, correct?
We will. We'll answer them on the show.
This is great. We've never done something like this. I've never done a 4-part series before, so I'm really, really excited.
I'm going to guess you've probably not done laughter and sexuality in the same show before either. But third show will be interesting for sure.
Not on a television show, no. No. And I won't take that any further. Pam, I've always thought, it is something I believe. I have a plaque in my kitchen that says, "Home is where your story begins." And I believe that that's true. I think that we find ourselves on certain journeys, we take certain paths, we cross paths with certain individuals, because that there is something that is that we are drawn to people. I don't know specifically to say that it is for a reason, but I do think there's an energetic connection. And I know when I met you that day that I went out to Hebrew Healthcare to visit another friend, it was like this, we need to do something. So that in mind, tell me about your story, how it began, because here you are, the Director of Dementia Services. Where did it all start?
It all started at home, just like you said. You know, in our family, we had my great-grandmother who was 99 years old and said to me, "Pamela, don't ever grow old, it's just no fun."
Yeah.
And I thought, wow, should hope that we can do something about that. And I really started as I was going through high school and eventually college, realizing that as much as I love kids and I adore my own children, my comfort is with older adults. And that started back with Great Grammy in, Rye, New York, and my grandparents in Manchester, and my other grandparents in Windsor. And it was my grandmother in Windsor who had Alzheimer's disease. And she, we started, as most families do, suddenly realizing that someone has labeled us as the caregivers. We were just the people who showed up every Sunday for supper and mowed her lawn and helped her with her taxes and a few other simple things at first, simple for family to kind of take over, harder for the older adult. But then as she progressed in her aging and my grandfather's aging and eventual death, it became more of an imperative that we be involved in order to help her. And eventually, as we learned of her Alzheimer's disease, eventually moved her in with us, and finally to a nursing facility out in the eastern part of Connecticut, and she passed away about 3 years after that. So we've been caregivers from the very initial stages all the way through all of those difficult decisions, the driving and the relationships, and does she remember me, and where to provide services and how to get her to accept services, and all of those challenges. And then eventually the feelings of, do we put someone in a nursing home or not? Does anyone ever put someone? I think language matters a lot, and over these next 4 shows, I'm sure we'll talk about that a lot.
Yeah.
The words we do use matter. And I don't think that anybody ever just puts someone in a nursing home. So I think that, having lived that experience, that really prepared me for my professional development, which is in the field of gerontology. My schooling is in gerontology. My master's degree is in gerontology and human development. And it's really what I love to do. I love the work of aging, and I love helping everybody explore those concepts and kind of look at what we can do to help facilitate someone's journey too.
I think it's important too to mention that years ago, before you had the degrees, before you had the big job, you even did, even in the smaller tasks and jobs that you had, that there was a connection with Meals on Wheels, for example.
Absolutely.
And I think about that, and I think you saw the picture of aging from several angles. You had different perspectives.
Absolutely.
With your own grandmother.
And with other people's grandmothers,
Yes.
like the Meals on Wheels. I mean, I could tell a million stories, and that would take way more than 4 shows, but I can remember to this day so clearly my good friend Monica's grandmother, who lived on East Street in our hometown, and I would deliver Meals on Wheels, and I would knock on the door, and there would be no answer. And I thought, oh my gosh, because they give us training on what to do if someone's fallen or sick or not there or worse. So I'm knocking on the door, panicking, thinking worst case scenario, and I'm like, Mrs. M, where are you? Mrs. M, where are you? And she would say, I'm sorry, dear, it's cleaning my closets. And I'm thinking, lady, clean your closets on Tuesdays and Thursdays. Monday, Wednesday, Friday is my day. You can't clean your closets on those days.
No
It's giving me a heart attack.
Yeah. The whole idea just makes me laugh, and I wanted to bring into that you are also a certified laughter leader.
Yeah.
And we're going to talk about that more in depth in another show. But I did want to talk about a little bit about that now in connection with the story you told me once about your grandmother and going to the library. Would you tell us that story?
I think that a lot of times families look at this person who has a progressively obvious memory problem and don't quite know how to deal with this. Yeah. And I talk about in our support groups that I run, that it's certainly not my phrase, it's actually something from a book called Learning to Speak Alzheimer's. Joanne Koenig-Kost points out that the disease itself does some to diminish someone's dignity, but the real stigma and dignity loss is because of our response to the individual and the changes that we see. So as an example, and this is how we first in my family started realizing the importance about humor in our caregiving. My grandmother had taken us, she was still driving, very high functioning at this point. I was about 14, and of course, as a 14-year-old, everything is just so dramatic.
Of course.
So I had myself, my 2 younger sisters, my grandmother, we're all going to the Windsor Library. And we're going through the library, and there's this big door that says, "Do not enter, alarm will sound." And of course she goes right through it, and I hope the sound folks don't, scream when I go, blam, 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 go all of the alarms.
Yeah.
And she starts walking through this alarmed door. And at that point we looked at her, and this kind of panic in how obvious this problem is now to everyone in Windsor, in my mind as a 14-year-old. And I looked at her, and we felt a need to protect her dignity. And so we said, maybe that's where the librarians keep the really dirty books that the librarians read after hours. And that deflected this problem away from her, ensuring or restoring her dignity. And so I use humor a lot, never to make fun of the person or the family or the situation, but as a way of coping through some of these very, very challenging, stressful situations.
What might have happened, do you think, had you not done that? What were the typical reactions?
I always say people with dementia have two fears. They don't want to look crazy or stupid.
Yeah.
And so often a lot of what they're doing in their behaviors and their function is to protect that from being discovered. I met with someone today who was adamant that she's not going to do this and she's not going to do that. And as soon as we started really testing her, she says she's fine. It was painfully obvious that she's not fine and that she has significant problems with her memory. And so her denial defense mechanism came up. And so my job is not to push, because I know what the answer here is. My job is to help support her until she can trust enough that I'm not going to make her look crazy or stupid. And that takes time and relationship building. And in caregiving, it's very difficult. I'm kind of going off on a tangent
That's great.
here.
That's fine.
Because for a caregiver, if I'm the daughter, I'm now shocked that mom's so much worse than I realized. And the daughter was sitting with me as we had this assessment today. And I'm sure as she realized that mom can no longer do simple math, 7 from 100 is what? And mom can't do that. Or mom can't recall that Valentine's Day was 5 days ago or whatever, however long ago. She thinks we're in the early part of February. So it's those kinds of things that really the family becomes aware of. Again, their reaction of shock or fear then makes that individual with a memory problem feel embarrassed, ashamed, complete stigma, and totally afraid. Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying there's nothing to be ashamed or afraid of. I don't mean to diminish that, but I think that we can lessen the effects of those emotions with the proper responses and proper education.
And you can see why this is such a big topic. So Pam Atwood, we'll maybe need a year to cover all of this.
Maybe more.
Maybe more. But in any event, you are now at Hebrew Healthcare, and I want to say, just to put it on the record, because I had never been out there until a month or so ago. I did not realize you were a not-for-profit. I did not realize you were a non-sectarian.
Correct.
That healthcare provider, full spectrum.
Yes.
Of services, and which I think is key. So the programs that you have support a lot of people.
A lot of people throughout, beyond West Hartford's territories. We have assisted living services out in Vernon Rockville, in Granby, in Hartford, West Hartford, obviously. So we are out in the communities, plural, in northern Connecticut. I also do speaking all over and education throughout Connecticut, New England, California, Montreal. I mean, I've been to a number of different places. So really the scope of our services reaches way beyond 1 Abrams Boulevard. But through our central core services, we do offer a full spectrum of aging-related services and supports. So, and for dementia care, that's so important because what my grandmother might need, your neighbor will not want. So for instance, one person may want home care services, another may want, community-based services, day centers, senior centers, support groups. Another person may only want technology-based services. So we can connect people with a number of programs and services. Maybe if there's a financial issue, then we can help with resources to help with financial as well. So we can really help educate people. So
You're
many
like
people
one-stop
don't know.
shop
We
shopping.
really are, especially when it comes to dementia care.
And it's I was so heartened for the community in general to find out that you exist. I mean, the scope of what you do. I want to get into some of the I think some of the basic questions that some people have. Is there a typical age of when dementia, like, oh, now you had that birthday, that means you're going to develop dementia. Is there anything like that?
You know, when I was in college, we all thought at that point, well, if you made it to 90 and you didn't have it, then you're clear.
Yeah.
And that's not really true. And part of this gets back to the definition of dementia versus Alzheimer's disease. We can talk about that next.
Okay.
But the age issue is really important. This is a disease that one of the primary and most significant risk factors is age. Because unfortunately we don't grow brain neurons the same way that we do like our skin cells or our other cells in our body. So what happens is pretty much what you have, they used to think what you had at age 20 is all you're going to have for the rest of your life. There's new research that shows in certain parts of the brain there is new nerve growth, new cell growth, but they're still not sure how to stimulate that. Is there a different way to promote that in the areas that are affected by Alzheimer's and other kinds of dementia? But we still don't know a lot about the brain. What we do know is that as we get older, we've had opportunity to lose more brain cells. So every time you smoke, drink too much, nutritionally compromised, surgery, a brain trauma, a head trauma, all of those things then can increase your risk of losing brain cells. Now, you have maybe 100, billion neurons to start with. So you lose a couple because of a couple of cigarettes that you smoked in college, maybe not a big deal. You're smoking for 30, 40 years, that's a big deal. Now you've killed a lot of brain cells. So a disease like Alzheimer's has less to work with. If we look at the leaves on this tablecloth, there are a lot. If we take half of them away and then put a disease on this side, it's going to take much less time to impact the brain than if we had the whole complement.
Sure.
To fight that disease or to combat that disease. So part of that is why age is so relevant. As we're getting older, we've got fewer and fewer brain cells. And what happens is the diseases tend to take many years to develop. Researchers believe Alzheimer's disease may start 20 or 30 years before we ever see symptoms. So it takes time for these problems to accumulate in our brain to cause damage. So by about age 65, researchers tell us that about 10% of the population has Alzheimer's or another form of dementia. And by age 85, nearly half the population has Alzheimer's disease.
Oh my gosh.
And it's increasing at such an exponential rate that the experts tell us now that every 68 seconds, another American gets Alzheimer's disease. That's how quickly it's growing.
Okay, we didn't talk about that beforehand because
staggering statistics.
That really is a staggering statistic. Now, I know, and I want to be sure that you know in the audience, we are not going to end this series on a down note because Pam is in a position to know a lot of things that are cutting edge, and she has some wonderful new information to share with us in a future show. So all is not lost.
Fret not.
But do stay with us for the series because the information is important. Pam, I want to go back now to just a moment ago. You said about the difference between Alzheimer's and dementia. Talk about that a little bit.
Sure. Dementia is an umbrella term that means a loss of intellectual functions, things like reasoning, judgment, and of course memory. Alzheimer's is one of many diseases that causes dementia. So if we can look at a different term, like furniture. Okay, furniture is a general term. Chair is a specific kind of furniture. Table is a different kind of furniture. There are similar features. They both have legs. Technically, you can sit on both, but essentially they are different. Alzheimer's disease is one kind of dementia.
Okay.
Vascular dementia is a different kind. There are similar features, but they are essentially different. Just like here in the studio and in most room in your house, you have more chairs than any other kind of furniture. There's more Alzheimer's disease than any other kind of dementia, which is why so often people will say, what's the difference between Alzheimer's and dementia? There isn't. Technically there is. Alzheimer's is a neurological disease. The symptom is the dementia. It also causes a loss of physical function and decline. So vascular dementia, things from like strokes, mini strokes, problems. And again, when we're 90, the vasculature in our brain, the The vessels in our brain aren't as strong as they used to be.
They're
more
worn
at risk
out.
for bleeds. That's why in that 9th decade and higher, you may have people who've never had a cognitive impairment before now develop a vascular dementia.
That was my grandmother, just a few months before her 101st birthday.
And it can happen. Now, just like in the room, we have more than one kind of furniture, you can have more than one kind of dementia going on in your brain at the same time. And that's what we would call a mixed dementia.
All right. I want to move ahead just a little bit with that, and we're going to pick up that thread down the line too. Is there a typical downward slide? You mentioned about interviewing a mom and daughter today, and I kind of got a picture about what the daughter might be suddenly becoming aware of something that has been there all along. But is there something typical? Is there a significant first cognitive change or anything like that?
Sure. You know, we always say when you see one person with Alzheimer's, you've seen one person with Alzheimer's. But there are enough anecdotal stories that we've gathered through science and study and just, convenience, from support groups and whatnot, that we know that there are some typical first signs. There is some research that also shows that there may be other signs that most of us aren't even aware of. For instance, there is one study that says that a change in smell or a loss of smell may be one of the earliest signs. Now, not everybody who has a change in smell, I don't want anybody who thinks, oh my gosh, I have a problem with my smelling, that may be the first start of Alzheimer's. That's not necessarily the only thing that affects smell. But, and again, not everybody, my grandmother, I don't think she ever lost her smell, I don't know. But it's hard to say because we don't usually ask about that. We ask about the eyes, we understand when someone's not hearing as well. We're very unaware about a smell issue usually. But there are a lot of different things that can cause that, like I said, sinus problems or other neurological changes. It's important to get those things tested, though. What I hate hearing is that someone says, well, you're getting a little older.
Yeah.
Well, you know what? Everybody's getting a little older. Age is not a diagnosis. That's just an excuse.
Yeah.
So, sure, there may be age-related changes that are normal. Some forgetfulness is normal. Forgetfulness that impacts your daily life, though, that's not normal. And if you've always been good at numbers, you used to be an accountant, and now you can't pay your own bills, that's a significant change. You're a famous cook in your family, and you can't remember your own favorite recipes, that's a significant change. So the key thing here, and this is where the caregiving really comes in too, is you have to know what's a change for you. It can be smell. It can be spatial orientation. That's also a very early symptom. So for instance, my grandmother had problems with her eyes, so we blamed the eyes on this problem. She couldn't line up the car in the garage anymore. My grandfather made these big X's on the back wall with circles so she could line up the headlights, and she still took out the stone wall next to it with the car 3 times.
Oh my.
So we blamed her eyes. That makes sense, right? She's had cataracts, glaucoma, a little macular degeneration. Turns out, no, those were the spatial orientation problems in the earliest stages of her Alzheimer's disease.
Pam, in about 10 minutes we have left, I want to focus specifically about getting deeper into the caregiving.
Yes.
And that is that idea that what the caregiver notices, when the caregiver is taking the person who needs the care, let's say to see the doctor. What are the kinds of things the caregiver, if that person is doing a good job, what kind of things are they looking at? What can they tell the doctor?
The most important things, like I said, are changes. So for instance, and it can be any little thing. All of a sudden, mom's no longer being able to remember where she put the bills to pay them. And the heat gets, the oil isn't delivered, or the electricity is shut off, or something like that. I had a client who had a problem paying her cell phone bill, and we couldn't reach her to schedule her next appointment for her cognitive assessments because she had forgotten to pay the phone bill. So it's those little things that can happen to any of us.
Right.
But those are the things that when we put them all together, and it's usually a diagnosis in retrospect when the family says, oh, that's why Graham had the problem with the car. That's why she's hiding the bills now, because that's what happens. They forget where they've put them. They know they're important. So the next time those bills come in, they hide them so they can make sure that no one else takes them, and then they forget where they've put them. The person they blame first is the person they're closest to. It's usually the housekeeper or the daughter. And that's what happens very frequently. But if you think about that, that makes sense. As awful as it is to think my daughter is stealing my jewelry, it's better than the alternative, which is I'm losing my mind. So very frequently they'll say, well, she must be stealing my stuff. Or that person you have coming in and cleaning, she's taking everything. And those are some of those early signs. But it can be changes in mood, changes in any kind of sleep patterns. It doesn't have to be Alzheimer's disease. It can be sleep, stress, B12 deficiency, thyroid disorder, all of these different kinds of things.
But what I gather from that is that whoever that person is who is the caregiver, that person is the one person who sees it all.
Not only sees it all, and it depends, because there are some caregivers who are more removed. But yes, if the caregiver is involved, they are a crucial part of the diagnostics process, because they're the ones who can validate. People with dementia, especially if they are very bright or very creative, are wonderful at faking it and covering it up for a long time. So if I go to my doctor and I say, oh no, doctor, everything's fine, yep, the kids are great. These are a lot of social skills. If you think about the questions your doctor asks, they rarely are really probing to see whether or not, okay, and people can get around it. Oh, did you see the presidential debate? Do you know who the president is? Oh, I'm a Democrat, it doesn't matter who it is. I'm a Republican, they're all, and they cover it very well. And a clinician may think, this person's fine. They're responding appropriately. Instead of saying, oh, I don't know who the president is. That rarely happens. So they cover it up very early, versus a child or a spouse who's the caregiver who says, this is a change. Dad was always really involved in politics. He used to go crazy over Nixon, and that used to really get, they know what's a change. So it's really important for the family, and then to validate. I had a client once tell me that she had had lunch in Boston Common with Norman Rockwell. And she gave me this incredible story, had pictures and paintings, and her daughter walked out afterwards with me. She says, that entire story was false, don't you? She fooled me. We call it confabulation, and very bright, very creative people are very good at it.
And we have exactly 2 minutes left. and I know. There is this statistic I want to throw out here for the audience, and we're going to repeat this with every show. This is part 1 of 4 parts. And that statistic is that 80% of caregivers describe the experience as rewarding. 65% of the caregivers die first, meaning they die before the person they're caring for. 65%. That gets to this whole issue of the importance of the caregiver, learning how to give care, how to take care of him or herself, how to be trained. We're going to get more into that in the next show. But the whole idea of the caregiver, you mentioned a few minutes ago about the housekeeper or the daughter. Is it true that it's usually the daughter is the first natural kind of stepping into the role caregiver?
Daughter or daughter-in-law.
Or daughter-in-law. Pam, we're going to get into a couple of other things here as the series goes along, because there's so much here. I do want to mention, though, to the people in the audience, there's a phenomenal program out at Hebrew Healthcare Center, and you have classes, training, workshops that are held in various parts of the state. I'm going to invite people to go on the website for the Hebrew Healthcare Center and get more information. And don't forget, come back to us when we do parts 2, 3, and 4. Send your emails to Pam, and we'll be answering your emails on the 4th part of the show. So Pam, let me thank you very much for being here on the show. And I found this wonderful quote from this author and motivational speaker, Brian Tracy. I thought it would be great for tonight. He said, in life, you can never be too kind or too fair. Everyone you meet is carrying a heavy burden. So thanks everyone for joining us tonight, and I do hope we see you again for parts 2, 3, and 4.
Thanks, Zita.
It was wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you.